Well, it's taken me a while, but we've gone for 20 years off the back of the end of the Waine Train yesterday, if you can't tell. Hello everyone and welcome to this looking forward video for the Waine Train series that we did here with Plymouth Argyle on Sean Does FM. We've gone forward 20 years and we're going to see what's happened with the club off the back of our quadruple winning season, which managers took over from us, and also what happened to the players that did help us pick up that quadruple. So if you like videos like this and want to see more of them, then do make sure that you go down below, leave a thumbs up on the video, and also consider hitting that subscribe button and turning that notification bell on as well, especially as coming up soon there'll be a chance for you guys to win a copy of FM25 when it does come out. Not immediately. I don't have quite that much pull, unfortunately, with the people at SI. Also, the beard's gone. It's summer here in New Zealand, far too hot for that thing. Just thought it'd be a bit funny for the intro, but as I said, we've gone for 20 years off the back of where we left things at the end of the save, which we did put out yesterday. If you missed the episode, I'll leave a link to it over in the top right corner. We did complete the quadruple with Plymouth Argyle, the Champions League, the FA Cup, the Carabao Cup, and also the Premier League. So if you missed that episode and want to check out how that did happen, then do click on that link. It did feature in the Champions League final a man of the match performance from the Waine Train, and today, as I said, we're going to have a look at what has happened with Plymouth Argyle. And first up, what we're going to do is have a look at the managers that have taken over at the Pilgrims since we left 20 years ago in game. And the first man to take over from us was none other than Pep Guardiola, off the back of him getting the sack from Manchester City. As you can see, these days he's actually a scout for Man City, having returned to Plymouth Argyle as a scout for 4 years prior after he did wind up his managerial career, but he was the first person to take over from us. But to be fair, it was not a very good reign. He only lasted 6 months at the Pilgrims. As you're about to see, we'll make our way down here. He was hired as the Plymouth manager in July 2027, not too long off the back of us leaving off the back of our Champions League final win. But because of the club's poor league position, he got sacked in early December, one of the very few managers who did not win anything while he was at Plymouth Argyle. And in terms of the one transfer that he did make when at the club, because that Paul Tate one was one that we set up a loan to be a future mandatory fee, he signed one player from his former team in Manchester City, and that was Samuel Chukwueze for $43.5 million. Unfortunately, didn't turn on, keeping the history for players from other clubs. That was the one signing that Pep made. Obviously, didn't do him much good, as he only lasted a couple of months there at Plymouth Argyle. But off the back of that, the club made one of its more successful managerial appointments, as it did appoint the former Newcastle manager at the time in Eddie Howe. So that was an interesting one off the back of a big name like Pep Guardiola. If we go and have a look at his actual history, now we've brought it up down the right-hand side, you can see he was in charge there at Plymouth Argyle for a period of close to 3 seasons. We'll have to go back here to the previous screen to actually see what trophies he did pick up, albeit on the 4th paragraph down, we can actually see what he did win with Plymouth Argyle. He took charge and stayed until May 2031, and he won the Europa League in 2030, so did pick up the club's second European title, albeit not quite as good as the Champions League. And also in that same year, they did win the European South American Club Challenge, which is played between the winners of the B-grade continental competitions in those regions, the Europa League, and I think the Copa Sudamerica in South America. So that's one they also won, albeit not too sure if that should count as a big trophy there for Eddie Howe, but he did pick up 2 ones there that do make their way into his biography. And of course, he would have made quite a few transfers because of that, that did include some of our players that we did have at the club. If we go over now to the transfer screen, like you saw before, you probably would have seen some of those transfers that did take place when Eddie was at the club. In his first window, I got rid of the likes of John David Mosquera, back up behind Serginho Dest, not a bad fee either, for around 20 million nearly to Sheffield United, and bought in some decent looking players in the likes of Thiago Gueva at that stage from Benfica. Ended up making 145 appearances for the Pilgrims in a 5-year period. Also, he bought in Asbjorn Kristoffersson from Birmingham for 14 million. He played 331 games over 13 years. Did the central midfielder, certainly a big transfer there that Eddie Howe did make. Also, he bought in on transfer deadline day, did lots of business late in the window here. Did Eddie Howe power him from Barcelona? Not too sure about him because can't click on him. And also, going into the next season, he did sign Aaron Montiel from Santos Laguna for £7 million. He played 144 games before leaving for Roma and also made a return to England through West Ham, another central midfielder out of Mexico. So those were the first couple of moves that Eddie Howe did make. Off the back of that, we go forward to the next season where he was still in charge, signed some more players there over on the left-hand side, including Darwin Núñez. Was not expecting that, but he came in obviously as a striking option for 56 million. And to be fair, in only 100 games, that goal-scoring record, not too bad compared to his time at Liverpool. So Darwin Núñez made his way to the Pilgrims between 2029 and 2032. And off the back of that, before he retired, scored a boatload of goals in not many games over in Saudi Arabia. So a very interesting player there that made his way to Plymouth Argyle in Darwin Núñez. Some players he got rid of though, Mohamed Baloumi, albeit on loan. Also Chuck Wasey, the man that Pep bought in, he went to Arsenal. Sarawi went to Fulham for £11 million. That's one of the first players who departed that we can have a look at here. He made his way to Fulham off the back of 84 appearances, 17 goals. To be fair, he was quite good in that left wing position for us during the save, albeit towards the end of it, Nestri Irinkunda, I felt like, was the first choice left winger because he just created so many chances. And off the back of that Fulham move, he did make his way to Sheffield United QPR and ended up finishing his career at Lillestrøm over in Norway, his homeland. So Osama Sarawi, he was one of the first players that Eddie Howe did let go of, albeit the season before, of course, he did let go of one David Mosquera, and he went to Sheffield United, made 202 appearances for those guys before a couple of years at Al Sadd to finish his career over in Qatar. So that was the career of one David Mosquera, to be fair. Didn't play too much for us at Plymouth Argyle. As I said, more of a bench impact player. Certainly got more game time when he made his way to Sheffield United. And going forward to the next transfer window, still when Eddie Howe was at the club, no transfers in. Interestingly, let go of Ollie Bone, who was quite a promising player from one of our youth intakes while we were doing the save. But one of the big names there he let go of was actually Victor Christensen on loan to Newcastle. Not for a fee, so we'll check on that later. But also, Damian Pizarro went to Borussia Dortmund. Obviously, if he brought in a player like Darwin Núñez, probably didn't need Damian Pizarro. He goes to Dortmund. To be fair, not much of a loss in that transfer because we did sign him on quite the cheap. But 115 appearances for Plymouth, 36 goals. Played a little bit less for Dortmund, but a pretty similar goal-scoring ratio. And amongst that time, spent 1 year out on loan at Bayer Leverkusen with only 1 goal scored, and then went to Cologne and didn't do too well. 50 appearances, only 3 goals, to be to say, off the back of that Dortmund move. His career did deteriorate towards the latter end, but that was the career of Damian Pizarro, the backup to the Waine Train for the last few seasons. And in terms of Eddie's last transfer window in charge at Plymouth Argyle, as you can see, he sold the Waine Train, did bring in Ricardo Espinosa from Club America, Zach Pope from Man City, and Kaká from Fluminense, but he did let go of a lot of our favourites at Plymouth Argyle alongside that because he did depart the club in early July 2031. He let go of Victor Christensen, loaned him out before, but to Newcastle for £43 million. These days, actually a head of youth development, but going back to his playing career, it does mean we can actually look at this in a bit more detail than with some of our other players. But he was a solid backup option for us at the time, in behind Miguel Gutierrez, and it did look like Miguel Gutierrez probably would have still been the first choice left back under Eddie Howe. To be fair, did quite well to make a slight profit on that, selling him to his former club in Newcastle. Off the back of that, actually got a move to Real Madrid for $68 million. They make a big loss when he went to Inter Milan for $33 million, and then went to Real Sociedad to finish off his career. Very certainly got a lot more game time before moving into a head of youth development role, and so far he has not been employed by anyone in 7 years in that job, despite the fact he actually doesn't look like the worst head of youth development, does Victor Christensen. The Waine Train, I was going to hold off to the end of the episode, but I think now's the right time to have a look at what happened to our main man. He left under Eddie Howe to Reading, for £2.6 million. Now, to be fair, Reading at this stage were kind of on the brink of making the Premier League. I think we'll just check what they were doing in the season coming in to 2030, and they were getting quite close to a playoff spot, but unfortunately didn't actually make their way up to the Premier League until 2033-34, and immediately made their way back down to the Championship for a couple of seasons, by which stage our main man unfortunately had left the club. But the Waine Train did end up playing 148 games for the Pilgrims. Obviously, most of those were while we were at the club for those 4 seasons, 53 goals, including one in the Champions League final where he was man of the match in that episode that came out yesterday. Off the back of that, 34 goals and 121 appearances for Reading, mostly in the Championship. That's not too bad, but quite a nice transfer off the back of that. He went back to his first club in terms of a professional outfit in the Wellington Phoenix out of New Zealand in the A-League for 4 years, 79 appearances, 33 goals, just seeing if he won something with those guys, and he did, albeit just the Australia Cup in 2034. That is kind of like a pre-season cup competition that usually the Phoenix don't go too deep in, at least in terms of real life. And he finished his career with a couple of years in Austria at Wolfsburg, albeit only 2 goals and 25 appearances. So quite interesting to see there. The Waine Train was just kept hold of for a couple of years there by Eddie Howe, but didn't look like he played too much. So unfortunately, despite the fact we gave him a pretty good contract, he didn't really get a lot of game time under both Pep and Eddie at Plymouth Argyle, and in the end also 99 appearances for the New Zealand national team. Didn't quite make his way to 100, but did score 27 goals for the All Whites. That was the career of the Waine Train. Unfortunately, thought we better bring that up a little bit earlier than we would otherwise like to, because he was let go of quite early under the management of Eddie Howe in a transfer window. As I said, he got rid of actually quite a few nice players that we did sign during the save. Also departing was his A-League friend Nestori Irankunda for £20.5 million to Manchester United, who only played him in 2 games, where he scored a goal in the season of 2033 to 2034. So that was a very strange move, albeit did do a decent job out on loan at clubs like Southampton and Real Betis. Off the back of that, looks like he got a permanent move to Hoffenheim, just seeing if the fee is there. £13.5 million, and he did help them lift the Conference League in 2035. Off the back of that, went to Fortuna Dusseldorf for just 1 season, 13 appearances and 2 goals. And then Mirandes he went to for £800,000, 56 league appearances and 6 goals in 2 and a bit years. So that's how the career of Nestori Irankunda went. To be fair, was expecting a little bit more from him in terms of his time at Plymouth. He was there and made just shy of 100 appearances and scored 13 goals, but it would have been interesting to see how many assists he came up with, because he was a big chance magnet during the course of that save, and to be fair, did help them win the Europa League as well in that 2030 season. One of the other players that Eddie Howe did let go of was Simon Som, up a bit further to Bayer Leverkusen for £26 million. In his 6-year stint at the club, he actually made quite a few appearances, 169, 7 goals, and quite a few of those did come in the latter stages of our Champions League winning campaign. Off the back of that, he also made his way to Germany and to Bayer Leverkusen, played quite a bit for those guys, 127 appearances, 3 goals, albeit with a defensive midfielder. Goals aren't really something you do expect from him. And then he went to Montpellier for his last couple of seasons at the end of his career. So that was the story of Simon Som. Did a pretty good job for us in that balling midfielder role, and those were the big names that did depart the club under Eddie Howe. But to be fair, he did win a couple of trophies, most notably the Europa League, but he did set the club up quite nicely, Eddie, off the back of those trophy wins, because the next manager who did take over was this man here, Ruben Saliers, out of Spain, and he ended up being one of the most successful managers that Plymouth Argyle did have up until their current one. He spent 7 years at the club, and we're just going to look at his history here so I can show you guys what he did win in that 7-year period. You can see in 2034, so it took him a couple of seasons, but he did win the Europa League with the Argyle, so a second manager there to win the Europa League, and also that European South American Club Challenge. But it was a free trophy year for Plymouth Argyle. He was the first man to pick up the Super Cup at the Pilgrims, and only 2 seasons later picked up the FA Cup for a second time at the club, and then did it a second time himself the following year, back-to-back FA Cups, and also picked up the Community Shield before he did get sacked in December of 2038. So he did pick up 6 competitions there at Plymouth Argyle in that period of 7 years, and because of that was a manager who did get rid of quite a few of the remaining players that we did have in our save at the club. In his first window, as you can see there on the left-hand side, he did make a couple of big signings, including Tino Livramento, getting him back from Saudi Arabia for £36 million. One of the reasons he might have done that, because he did let go of Serginho Dest on a free transfer. He went to Saudi Arabia, not too surprising considering how injury prone he was, and also he retired quite early at the age of 32 years old, but he made 163 appearances for us at Plymouth Argyle. No goals, did score 6 in 2 years in Saudi Arabia, but Serginho Dest was quite injury prone, as I said. That kind of reflected there in the age that he did retire. Didn't have too much of a career off the back of that free transfer to Saudi Arabia, and he also got rid of a few other of our first team players at Plymouth Argyle. Ibrahim Omalagic was that young promising player that we did sign late on in the save. Got a couple of games in that last season out at right wing. He also went on a free to Bologna. These days is a manager, to be fair, not a bad looking one attribute wise, but so far has not got a job. But in terms of his career stats, we can look at this. He went on a free to Bologna after we signed him for $7.5 million from Bromby, and to be fair, didn't actually play a game, it looks like, off the back of that season after we left. So it looks like that Pep Guardiola and Eddie Howe did give him a little bit of football, and also in that last season, Eddie Howe gave him 6 starts, but obviously didn't impress. He let him go on a free play quite nicely for Bologna. Some really good average ratings there for the young promising right winger, who, to be fair, at that stage should have been in the prime of his career. That earned Bologna £21 million when they sold him to Gladbach in 2038-39. Yet again, did quite well for those guys based on average ratings. And that was the career of Ibrahim Omalagic. We'll just see here if he did win any big trophies over in Germany. You can see did get relegated from the Bundesliga and back up as champions. Also picked up a Conference League with Gladbach in 2039. Picked up the Coppa Italia as well with Bologna. But to be fair, apart from that and a couple of Super Cups in Italy, didn't win too much after he did depart Plymouth Argyle. Did young Ibrahim Omalagic. That was one of the youngsters I was quite interested to see how he would get on in the save. Unfortunately for him, didn't do too much after winning Plymouth Argyle, apart from probably the most notable one, that Conference League win at Gladbach quite late in his career. Also let go of Tom Bischoff, albeit at that stage that was only on loan, and Luke James, our really promising right wing we had in that last youth intake, as well as Dave Robertson, another quite promising player. Loaned those guys out, so still had them in the system, but those were the players' first transfer window that Salas didn't let go of. Of course, he did have a 7-year spell at the club, signed some big names in his second season. Andreas Schelderup from Real Madrid for £42.5 million. He actually made 112 appearances and scored 12 goals for the Pilgrims, so a very interesting signing there, one of the best wonder kids in the game. And also, at this stage, probably quite an old Alexander Isak from Newcastle for £39.5 million, and he made a lovely amount of appearances in 69 and scored 18 goals. Fair to say Newcastle, I think, would have got the better end of that deal, but some big names signed there from Salas going to his second season at Plymouth Argyle. And in terms of departures, he did get rid of some quite big names. Tom Bischoff went to Real Betis, but quite a nice fee, to be fair, of £42 million. Made 212 appearances for us at Plymouth Argyle, 22 goals off the back of that. Actually paid a little bit more for Real Betis, 249 appearances, 16 goals, and then finished his career off with short 2 and 3 season stints at Real Sociedad and at Gladbach. That might mean he was also there the same year that Omalagic did when they picked up the Conference League. Just looking to see if that was the case, and unfortunately doesn't look like it was. So wasn't quite there for that Conference League win at Gladbach, but would have spent a bit of time playing alongside Omalagic, one of his former Plymouth teammates. Also sold there by Salas going into his second season was Jacob Grace for a fee of about $10 million as he went to Brighton. He played 160 games for us in the end in his last season at the club when we were there. He did drop down below the likes of Diamonde and Parola with 160 appearances for us, 4 goals, including one in that FA Cup final that we did win in our final season. Off the back of that, got some decent game time in 4 years for Brighton, 122 games and 2 goals before he left for Cardiff, 2 years there to finish his career, and played 77 times for the Bluebirds. That was the career of Jacob Graves, quite a decent centre-back option for us, and also left-back when we were there at Plymouth Argyle. He also let go of some quite good players on free transfers there. Did sell us Darwin Núñez off to Al Ittihad, where he did score all those goals, as you saw before. Then a couple more players who were quite influential in our save, and both of them went to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. Lamar Samardzic is the first one. He was there for 6 years at Plymouth Argyle, 175 appearances, 29 goals. We only hit him for one of our seasons, that final one, where we did win the quadruple. Off the back of that, 3 years in Saudi Arabia, where he did perform quite well. Galatasaray, 17 appearances, 2 goals, and finished his career off at Stuttgart for 3 years in Germany. So an interesting career there for Lamar Samardzic. Picked up quite a few honours when at Plymouth Argyle, but interesting to see that Plymouth Argyle did not get a fee for a player that we also picked up on a free transfer. Would have thought he might have gone for a decent amount of money, retired at 36. Probably a bigger name in terms of the save that also went to Al Nassr was Nikola Iliev. He tied Jack Cock in that final season for the most goals scored by a Plymouth Argyle player in a single season. That record is still intact, but 233 appearances for the Argyle in 8 years, 88 goals. Off the back of that, a very good strike rate at Al Nassr, 135 games, 85 goals, and then went back to Europe to Galatasaray in Turkey and spent 6 years there, 36 goals, 155 appearances. We certainly turned him into a very strong goal-scoring threat, especially off the back of us moving from that 4-2-3-1 to that 4-2-4. Nikola Iliev, probably actually the key player for us in that last season. Of course, he did pick up the player of the season, so it does make sense. But Nikola Iliev, a little bit surprising. He was let go on a free, did make his way to Al Nassr over in Saudi Arabia. And going down further, another name that did feature for us quite regularly at the Argyle, Rhys Williams. He went to Norwich for £8 million, did the former Liverpool man, who he picked up very cheap going into, I think it was our first season up in the Premier League. In terms of Plymouth Argyle, he played 126 games, 4 goals over an 8-year period, then spent 3 years at Norwich, 86 games for those guys, before a quick spell at Hull City to end his career. And it looks like he actually had quite a big hand in that Europa League winning campaign in 2030, as he was the runner-up in terms of the player of the season. So interesting career there for Rhys Williams. And I think that was the last of our players that was let go in that transfer window. I think now we'll start to skip forward on this a little bit quicker, especially there as I can't really tell who those players are that he did bring in for 200 million overall, albeit 72 million spent on Thijs Schalk out of Ajax. He was a Dutch striker and was very influential at Plymouth Argyle for 12 seasons in this save, 335 appearances, 125 goals, joining from Ajax. That's interesting. Might have been a replacement for both Iliev and Darwin Núñez, who did leave in that previous season. And in terms of outs, can't really see anyone there who's overly familiar. So we'll go forward to 34-35, and things are looking a little bit less familiar, albeit on the left-hand side, Evan Ferguson joined from Real Madrid for 55 million, rising to 70. Didn't actually spend that long at Plymouth Argyle. And to be fair, the Dutchman had a much better goal-scoring record. Ferguson only getting 36 goals from 101 appearances, albeit it does look like he spent 1 year out on loan at Real Sociedad, and off the back of that, made his way to Erzgebirge over in Germany. It's quite an interesting career there for Evan Ferguson, one of the best young players in Football Manager, when he did make his way to Plymouth Argyle. And looking over on the right-hand side, he sold the likes of Livramento, just seeing if there's any of our players in there. Doesn't look like that's the case. We'll continue to go forward and see what happens in his next season. Signed Bayetic out of Liverpool. That's not a bad signing off the back of what he did in real life last season when he was fit. And he made 157 appearances for Plymouth, 7 goals, and he did end his career at the club before retiring at 35 years old. Did help them to a couple of trophies. Did the former Liverpool man. And looking over on the right-hand side, this is where things get a bit more interesting. There's a couple of players there I recognise from my time at the club. First off, he sold Lorenzo Parola for £22.5 million to Atalanta. Don't mind that move, seeing as Parola is Italian, but he had a very good career in 10 years at Plymouth Argyle, 287 appearances, 8 goals, and only spent 3 years away from the club to finish his career to Atlanta, where he made 70 appearances, scored 4 goals, and then 1 season in Saudi Arabia to wrap things up. So that was the career of Lorenzo Parola, a big factor in our defence in that quadruple-winning season alongside Ousmane Diamonde. And above that, Luke James, that really good wonder kid that we got in our last youth intake at the club. He went to West Ham on a free transfer, which honestly is a bit disappointing. Only made 46 appearances for Plymouth Argyle in 9 years at the club, but then went to West Ham, was there for 9 seasons, and was huge for those guys. 239 appearances, 7 goals before a late career stint at Cagliari. The fact that West Ham picked him up on a free is pretty disappointing, I think. It is fair to say, because he was a player with a lot of potential. Thankfully, did actually get a winner's medal for the Europa League a couple of times at the club, but that is a bit disappointing. The fact that he did leave the club on a free transfer did what looked like to be the Gareth Bale region, and just going down a bit further, he sold some of those players who were quite big names who were signed earlier by other managers, but those were the 2 that did depart the club under his watch that season that we had at Plymouth Argyle. No one of note was let go of or signed, I feel like, in 2036-37, but his last season at the club, there was a big name that did depart over on the right-hand side. It's down this list just a little bit, but it was Ousmane Diamonde. He went to Villarreal for £19.5 million. As I said before, really big player for us in that quadruple-winning season alongside Parola in central defence. He spent 12 years at the Argyle, 339 appearances, 13 goals. That is a heck of a lot of games. Then spent that season at Villarreal before eventually making his way to Saudi Arabia, like many players are doing in the save. But that is not a bad career there for Diamonde. Picked up the African Defender of the Year on 7 occasions and also got shortlisted for African Footballer of the Year 12 times. So he certainly was one of the best centre-backs in the game. But that was the last season which Salles was in charge of Plymouth Argyle before he did get sacked because of league positions. So fair to say that Salles did get rid of quite a few of those remaining players that we did have at the Argyle. And off the back of that now, I think we can start to focus a bit more on just what trophies those managers did win at the club. Next up, after Salles, was this man who these days is in charge of Liverpool and Emre Belözoğlu out of Turkey. And unfortunately, he was there for nearly 3 years, but did not win anything at the club. So that update doesn't take us too long. He was there between 2039 and 2041. We'll just go down here a little bit and see what was notable. He was hired in January 2039 and actually got sacked because he lost the confidence of the dressing room, which is another way of saying should have been winning more games with those boys that he did have at Plymouth Argyle. And maybe one of the reasons for that was some of the players that he did let go of on free transfers, the first of which was Alex Scott, our biggest transfer of the save that we did do. The homegrown nation player in the end made 1 appearance shy of 400 in 12 years at Plymouth Argyle. That's a little bit gutting, but did score 30 goals before ending his career in a couple of seasons in Saudi Arabia. So to be fair, despite the fact we did pay a big fee for him, considering he spent 12 years at the club, feel like that is a bit justified, but a little bit interesting to see he was let go of on a free. Just seeing what he also picked up in his career, won a World Cup with England in 2038, and going down to the bottom paragraph, also was shortlisted for the FIFA Best Men's Player. That definitely would have been while at Plymouth Argyle, you would think, and also came third in the goal 50. So certainly was one of the best players in the world at some stage, was Alex Scott, but just departed the club before he could make that 400th appearance at Plymouth Argyle. And also let go of by the Turkish manager was Kasper Tobias. He also went to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia, so the same club as Alex Scott, but that was for a fee of £21 million. Not bad considering we only signed him for $3 million. To be fair, he played slightly more games than Alex Scott, but to be fair, with 13 years at the club and as a goalkeeper, that is somewhat expected. And then spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia in the season that we did win the Champions League. He was the goalkeeper of the season, was also the captain in that quadruple winning season. Kasper Tobias, a massive influence there at Plymouth Argyle. And just getting forward a little bit more in terms of Belözoğlu's time at Plymouth Argyle off the back of that previous season where he did sell Alex Scott and Kasper Tobias. And to be fair, now we're getting to a stage, I think, where most of the players that we did sign have departed the club. Still haven't seen the departure of players like Adam Randall or Obando, so maybe they actually finished their careers at the club, but it does look like the sales of those players have now stopped, so don't think we need to check in on this transfer history too much more. So continuing to look at what Plymouth Argyle actually won with the managers that did take charge after we left. Off the back of Balogzoglu leaving, Andrew Sparks, who was a caretaker manager quite a few times at Plymouth Argyle in between these managers coming and going, he actually did a decent stint there as interim manager for about 6 months before he departed and was replaced by Matthias Dahm, and he was sacked after only 190 days. Just going to see what his profile looks like. He looks an awful lot like Thomas Tuchel, so not too sure what's going on with the name there. Does look like that was actually Thomas Tuchel who took charge at Plymouth Argyle and didn't last too long, so not too good there for Thomas at Plymouth Argyle. But off the back of that, two managers who really were successful in the last couple of years of this save before we did hit the 20-year milestone. First up, David Wheater. There he is. He is these days manager of Chelsea, is the former player, I dare say, who in terms of when the game did start, would have been at Darlington, worked his way into management quite quickly, and ended up as the Liverpool manager back in 2039-40 after spells at Crystal Palace, Stoke, Bolton and Tamworth. But he is quite a good managerial career, it's fair to say, and at Plymouth Argyle he picked up trophies like the Europa League, won that in 2044, Community Shield, the Conference League and the FA Cup also in 2043, so 4 decent trophies there for David Wheater. For probably the most interesting thing you could argue in this Sim 4 that we have done, and that's that another current player took over as manager back in 2044, and that was Pablo Fornals, the current West Ham player. He made his way through the management ranks once he finished his career at Sevilla, starting at Casapia in 2040, then spent a short spell at Everton before taking over for one season at Atletico Madrid, but these days is the manager of Plymouth Argyle. And as you can see, with that reputation, he's quite hot stuff, and that's because he has won a boatload at Plymouth Argyle. He has just won the Champions League literally one day off the back of me finishing the Sim Ford. Also picked up the Carabao Cup earlier in the season. Last season won the Community Shield and the FA Cup. The season before was the first person off the back of me doing it to pick up the Premier League, and also that season won the Carabao Cup yet again, and also the season before, not too long after he took over, won that challenge game against the second tier champion of South America. So Pablo Fornals actually the most successful manager in the save at Plymouth Argyle. Very interesting to see how good he's done, and that is how Plymouth Argyle have got on in the 20 years since the save has finished. In terms of the general page here at the club, these days they have 5-star reputation with Fornals in charge and have remained a solid fixture in the Premier League throughout that time. Have never really threatened to be relegated, which is quite nice to see. There you can see going to this new season they are predicted to finish 5th, and they did finish there in this past season while also picking up the Champions League off the back of that previous title-winning campaign. And in fact, I tell a lie because it was last season, because this season Chelsea picked up the Premier League, and I'm not really too sure how I'm going to guess that's on head-to-head, because Plymouth Argyle, same goal differential, same amount of points, but one more game. That does feel a little bit harsh there that the Argyle did not pick up the Premier League trophy in it this season, but that was the case, so a bit frustrating there that Plymouth could not win the Premier League for a second time in 3 years, but they are these days definitely a powerhouse of European football, which is very nice to see. We'll just go forward now and check in on a couple of players I want to look at who did not pop up in those transfers that we did look at earlier. The first of which is Mike Cooper, who these days is a goalkeeping coach at Leyton Orient. He actually made his way to a couple of interesting clubs off the back of leaving Plymouth Argyle in 2028. Didn't actually see that one pop up in the transfers out, but made his way to Fulham, then Bristol City, then Sheffield United, then into Miami on loan before finishing his career at Crawley Town. We'll just see if we can find out what actually happened in terms of his playing career. There you can see off the back of that signing that we did make with Casper Tobias, and before then Luis Jr. He did not get much game time, so the homegrown player did leave. I believe that would have been off the back of the season that Pep Guardiola and Eddie Howe were in charge. That's what happened to Mike Cooper. The other goalkeeper that we did use in our squad at times during the last couple of years of the save was one for our youth intake in Adam Lindley. He ended up actually making no first team appearances for Plymouth Argyle. I'm pretty sure I used him in a cup game once, but obviously not in a league game. Off the back of that, he made his way around the world quite a bit. Went to Sheffield United for a few years, didn't play, then went to the Newcastle Jets, it looks like, as a backup, while spending a spell at Burnley where he didn't make too many appearances, then got some more game time with clubs like York City and Darlington before he retired at 35 years old. But the next player that we're going to look at is actually the player so far who's made the most appearances, I think, for Plymouth Argyle, quite close with Casper Tobias. This was Paul Tate, the player that we got in as the replacement for Sebastian Hausner on loan in that last season of the save. Turns out he ended up being a very, very good centre-back, making 459 appearances for the club, only scoring 4 goals, but off the back of spending 17 years at the club, has made his way to Juventus for the last couple of seasons, albeit spent the first one out on loan at Barcelona, but he's had one heck of a career as Paul Tate, just retired at the age of 38 just one season ago. One player that I didn't catch during the transfer history was Miguel Gutierrez, our starting left back for the last couple of seasons of the save. He spent 10 years at Plymouth Argyle, 309 appearances, 4 free goals, also was a runner-up in the Champions League Defender of the Season. I think that was the year that we did pick that up, the final season of our save, but in terms of when he finished up, he spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia to finish things off at Al Ettifaq, but he retired at the age of 36 off the back of that 2037-38 season. Adam Randall was one of the few homegrown club players that we did use throughout the course of the save in the end as the backup to Simon Som as the ball-wing midfielder. Unfortunately, he departed not too long off the back of us leaving in 2028, made his way to Southend where he made 64 appearances and scored 9 goals, the same amount he scored at Plymouth Argyle in 211. Off the back of that, 3 years at Salford where he made 125 appearances and then finished his career off at Grimsby Town in between 2033 and 2036. And another midfielder who slipped through the cracks was John Buckley. He these days is the director of football at Rotherham. Those guys are down in Sky Bet League 2 and it looks like they might be going down into the National League, but in terms of his playing career, he was at Plymouth Argyle until the end of that season where Pep and Eddie were in charge. Off the back of that, went on loan to Atlanta United, which helped him get a free move to Charlton for a couple of seasons. He pretty much went on free transfers off the back of that. Spent 5 seasons at Charlton before going to Chesterfield in the same division and finished up with a couple of seasons in the National League North and the National League at Basford. Did help those guys get promoted though from the National League North in 2036-37. Morgan Whittaker was one of the best players that we did have during the course of the Waine Train, picked up the most player of the season awards in the end of season reviews. He left the club at the end of the 2028-29 season, then went to Burnley for 7 years and actually got more game time there than he did in the same amount of time that he spent at Plymouth Argyle, but did score less goals. Morgan Whittaker, a very good player, especially in that first season in the Championship and also those first couple that we did spend in the Premier League before we did look to improve in that right wing position. Facundo Farias originally came in as a central attacking midfielder for us at Plymouth Argyle, but ended up being trained into a left winger once we did go to the 4-2-4. He left off the back of the 2029-30 season. Of course, he was the player who scored that screamer to help us pick up the winning goal in that Champions League final. And off the back of that, he went to Blackburn and made a lot of appearances for those guys, 266 for 68 goals before going back to his homeland of Argentina to finish his career at Rosario Central before retiring at the age of 36. And a couple of attackers to round things off. Isaac Varel came in quite late in the save as kind of a Swiss Army knife type of player. He spent 7 years at Plymouth Argyle, ended up making 127 appearances, albeit did only score 8 goals, so it kind of suggests he might have played more as a midfielder or a winger. Off the back of that, he went to France, made 251 appearances in 8 years for Nancy before he went to Paris FC and spent 2 years there before retiring at 36. And I think the last player who featured for us in our Champions League winning squad was the backup to Nikola Iliev. This was Alano Bando, who we did sign back in 2025-26, just before we did lose Andre Lucas Good-Johnson to Barcelona. He left off the back of the 2029-30 season. He only got 26 appearances for the club, but did score 10 goals, so quite a lethal threat when he was used. Then went to Osasuna in Spain, played a lot more for those guys and got 22 goals in 177 appearances. Then spent some short periods at some different clubs also in Spain, in Celta Vigo, Valencia, where he actually had quite a good strike rate, and then Granada before finishing up his career at Triestina, albeit got no game time there in Italy. And as I said, I think that's all the players that did play a part in our Champions League winning squad at Plymouth Argyle. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that video, bit of a recap of what's happened to the players who did feature in the save, and also what happened to the Waine Train as well. As Plymouth Argyle in the save, they're still doing well, but unfortunately the Waine Train, he didn't do too much off the back of us leaving the club, at least in terms of his time at Plymouth Argyle. Did do decently at Reading and at the Phoenix, but fair to say he was a big star for us when we were at the club. Champions League final player of the match. And I think it's fair to say that if Steven Schumacher does leave Plymouth Argyle for Stoke, like is being rumoured in real life, whoever the new manager is should probably start him up front, because the Waine Train, choo choo. But that will do it for this video. If you enjoyed it and you want more of these when I do these one club saves, then do remember to go down below and leave a thumbs up on the video, and also hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell on as well, so you're kept up to date when new videos do drop off the back of the Christmas and New Year break. As I said, coming out soon should be a chance for you guys to win a copy of FM25 when it does come out, so keep an eye on that one. To be fair though, early warning, you will need FM24 to try and win that, because it's a bit of an interesting competition. I'm going to make you guys try and earn it, but until I see you for that video, you can try and win a copy of FM25. Thank you very much for watching. Keep on keeping on, and I'll see you then. Cheers.